Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show, we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doom Patrol. A great episode. I love the therapy element of this episode. It's kind of interesting because everything's kind of been building up to this moment, and I did like to kind of section everyone's stuff off on their own. Let's break down a lot of people's stuff. VIDS was really fascinating because basically it's the situation of learning like his dad had a lot more control over his situation than he thought he would have. Like the whole thing is like, oh yeah, like basically there was a dating app he had set up years ago when he was 18 kind of as a goof, but it turns out there's a whole bunch of messages he's gotten. Initially his dad was like, hey, after the accident, you were so, I didn't want you to focus on the wrong thing. I want you to focus on getting better. But it's like, what about the years after that? And his dad's like, everything I did was to protect you. And you kind of see it to a certain extent because some of the people, like, they know who Vic is. They're like, oh my god, that's Cyborg. I even love one girl being like, booyah, go ahead, say it. That's your thing, right? Booyah. And he's like, okay, great. How many times have I said booyah? It's like, subsequently since the accident, you said it 31 times above the average, the acceptable amount to qualify it as a catchphrase. I'm like, that's so good. Because he hasn't said it so far this show, but because that's the thing, like, that always gets, like, caught up as his thing, it's just always like, especially because the cartoons play with it more, the whole aspect of like him constantly saying booyah. Maybe he does that in the comic books too, but it's like every once in a while I feel like in anything else I've ever seen Cyborg he'll say it, so obviously we haven't seen him say it in this, but I love him being annoyed. I mean, it's kind of interesting because he's been Cyborg for a while, but in the time since the accident he's only said it 31 times, and that's pretty impressive in like what, a 5-year period, so that's kind of pretty interesting. But it is kind of sad because for him it's like, you can understand his dad was trying to protect him for that because it's a thing of like, oh, how do you know if people really like you for you? Because some of those people are like, oh my god, you're a Cyborg. That's all they cared about. He did meet a girl named Mel and he was like, oh, but then like he learns that, oh yeah, Grid can now read his subconscious because he got rid of a lot of that stuff, and he ends up accidentally spying on her through like a security camera because of Grid, and he shows her what he really looks like now, and she saw her reaction and got disgusted. And it's that thing of like, yeah, sometimes you don't want to know, you think you want to know something, but you don't want to know. And for him it's like, oh, I'm gonna delete this profile or whatever, I mean, who knows, who's to say? I mean, for him it's like, oh, it's disgusting, but like for him maybe it's a situation of like, well, in her case, like maybe it was a situation of she was like, oh, is this some guy messing with me? Like she thought maybe it might have been a joke or a goof, or maybe she was just kind of like, oh my god, like I said, because it's sad because it kind of hit it off a little bit in those first few conversations, but now it's going to make Vic even more reluctant to kind of go forward with everything because of that, so, which is actually sad. I mean, once again, it's that whole aspect of kind of dating as a superhero. I like that they kind of added that in there to be part of his thing, but also just because of his situation too. Like, he's very different from most superheroes. Like, at least, like, he's always like that 24/7. So, like I said, either people accept him for who he is and just only want him because he's Cyborg, or, in that lady's case, I think her name was Mel, kind of, turned away from the fact that, oh, this is what you look like. So it's almost like there's no winning for him, and it probably is almost him giving up on like any form of a social life, so like I said, now you kind of see what his dad was trying to protect him from, like the harsh realities of it all. But at the same time, you do understand, once again, his dad had the best of intentions because we saw a memory when he was younger. It's like, don't tell dad because he told me not to, what was it, like, do what I did that ended up leading to me breaking my arm. It's like, okay, we won't tell your dad. He doesn't have to know everything. I think it's just because his dad's always been like that, and it's just got intensified since losing his wife, Vic's mom. So it's like, of course, grief, manifests in different ways. So, he's just very overprotective of his son, always has been. That can be a good quality. I mean, it's a good quality, but obviously it kind of have its drawbacks. So it was just kind of interesting in that regard. We had Rita's situation, which is kind of interesting to find out that basically Rita's whole deal, even her name Rita Farr, like, that's a made-up thing. Like, she met an actress that she was, inspired, like, oh, this actress inspired me to do what I wanted to do. And so because of that, Rita created this whole persona. And it doesn't seem like it was just her. It seems like her family kind of pushed her in that direction. And so it's understandable why she would have the identity crisis herself, because, like, for one, she's led her life being this persona, and it turns out that persona wasn't that good of a person, and now you're at conflict with yourself because it's like, this is who I am, but in actuality it's not. This is just some fabricated persona that I created. And obviously, she gets reflected by it, not just by torturing herself on the inside, but on the outside too, because not being able to keep control of herself means that her body gets all, she turns into mush, literally. And so that turns into that whole situation of like her going down the furnace. I love later on when Cliff was like, yo, we need to have a therapy session. She's like, it's like, Rita, what happened to you? And she was like, I was trapped in a furnace crying out for help and no one heard me. It's like, see, he's like, that's a great metaphor for all of us. She's like, no, I was literally trapped in a furnace. And it's like, hey, a literal furnace, even better. So... But it's kind of sad. Like, of course, she'd have the identity crisis that she had, especially because it turns out, like, obviously there's everything with the baby that she keeps seeing. Like, so, like, it's one of the things she regrets. I'm assuming because of her lifestyle, she probably felt like, no, I can't have a child. A child's going to stop me from being who I need to be. So either it's a child that because it's hard to say how you can interpret that either as maybe she had gotten an abortion and maybe for her she feels bad because in her mindset she was so caught up in trying to be an actress. But I don't know if they'd go down that route. It might be in a similar vein, because the thing is, I was wondering what's supposed to be a metaphor since they never show the baby. It's just kind of like a carriage or whatever to hold the baby. But then, like, that could just be a metaphor, or it could just be an actuality because she actually did have the baby, but she gave up the baby because she felt like, oh, no, I need to be Rita, so focused on her career, couldn't be a mother. Which is interesting because it does kind of make her story similar to Cliff's in certain regard. But for her, it seems like it does become a situation of, I need to kind of at least find some similar. It seems like the moment she's like, I'm going to be the best slime ball I can be. If I need to, if I want to, I could swallow the world whole. But it seems like confronting the fact that she doesn't know who she is. It seems like, I guess that's her taking the right steps in a certain direction. Because even Vic is obviously dealing with the whole aspect of like, the complicated relationship with his dad, because it's like, oh yeah, got to circle back to that. But like the whole thing of like, oh yeah, he still doesn't know whether Mr. Nobody was just messing with him, being like, oh, are your memories really yours? That's why I was kind of wondering too about his killing his mom situation, just the way it looked like when we saw the memory and everything, like when he was knocking back all those glass vials and stuff. Like, I feel like there was more to it, but maybe his dad warped his memories to be like it's something else. Maybe it was his own dad's fault and his dad was trying to warp Vic's memories because he's trying to alleviate his own guilt. Maybe that's why he pushes Vic so hard, because it was something he might have done. I have no idea, but it almost seemed, because I felt like when he was looking through that memory and stuff like that before, it looked like maybe there was something more to it. It almost looked like things weren't, but it looks like the footage hadn't been messed with. But to be fair, Silas is very good at what he does, so who's to say he didn't cover things up? I don't know. Maybe the whole point is just to get, Cyborg kind of off kilter, much like Rita kind of having an identity crisis. I think everyone's literally having one. Larry's situation is even sadder. Like, he ends up talking to the spirit. The spirit is actually doing a very interesting thing where it's basically recreating memories to kind of get him to kind of basically deal with his stuff. Because for Larry, he realizes like me and this spirit are caught in this endless cycle, because like the fact is that I'm torturing myself so much that I'm hurting a creature, and the spirit is hurting me back as retaliation, and it's just this endless cycle of hurt. Because the fact is, he recognizes and finally admits, because for him it's like, you want to put me in a situation and like you're getting the details wrong in that particular memory, the memory of like him and John being together one last time. It was the day before the accident and everything. And for him, it's like the details are wrong, because it's easy to put me in a situation where everything works to my favor, but that's not how things work. I don't change and history doesn't change. Because the whole point was that it was the spirit trying to find some way to make him feel better so he'd stop torturing himself, which in turn would stop him torturing it with his hurt. But for him, it's like he finally admitted, like, obviously he loved John and he wished he had done things differently. But it's like, given that time, because we also saw with his childhood, it's like, oh yeah, like his parents, especially at that time, it's like, him being gay was kind of seen as, this terrible thing to be looked upon. And it's like, oh yeah, like, what are the people at his school, at church, blah 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 blah, that type of shit. And it's like that guilt plus, for not just that, just for him, it's like the thing is, you're missing with this scenario that you're recreating, it's like you're missing the context. He was explaining to the spirit, it's like the fact is, being in the locker rooms, hearing all these gay jokes they were saying, and he was referencing two people, I guess they were gay, that were killed because of it. So I was like, there was no safe place for me. And it's like, And it's just, he wishes that he could have been with John, the person he loved. He kind of turned away from in that regard, you know. And that's, you know, you could, like, I figured it would be that much, but to hear him talk about it like that, and, you know, to get more context with it, it's kind of hurtful, especially knowing from his childhood of, like, yeah, like, you had to live this lie your entire life. Like, it's been there, and apparently a lot of people knew, but the fact is that you had to hide it from the world, and that's such a sad thing. I even love Cliff being like, he's like, and Cliff's like, gay. And everyone was like, really, Cliff? He was like, no, I figured, you know, once he said, you know, the healing would begin, and then he was like, that's not what I was going to say, but whatever. But I love that Cliff tried to hug him and everything, and it's like, we accept you for who you are. He's like, I'm not done talking. Cliff's like, oh, I'm sorry. So I thought that was kind of interesting situation. It does seem like the spirit kind of does its own thing, because it did go back to Larry after a while, but I think it does listen to what's going down, because it listened and saw what was going on with Cliff, which that's an interesting situation with Cliff. It's the whole thing of, you know, he was basically like short-circuiting and kind of getting a little delusional. He saw a bump with his daughter and it pissed him off. He thought like, oh, I'm gonna go there. I was like, oh crap, you're confronting him, and it's sad for him, and it was so messed up, because you were hearing Bump talk about, oh, the fact of the matter is that kid killed my buzz, because like I was, you know, because I had to kind of step into the father role. She was, you know, like having to go to therapy, like, oh, my dead mom and dad, and for him it pissed Cliff off, because it's like, you're talking about my daughter, like at the very least be happy you were there in her life, and it's a whole situation. But it turns out the whole big issue for Cliff, it's like, it's because he's so angry, because now it's like in his mind it's like Bump was probably a better father. Like that was all kind of a concoction in his head because he was going a little crazy at the time, but it's like it all makes sense for him. It's like a situation of like Bump was probably a better father to him. It's like I shouldn't be, because even if I told my daughter I was alive, the second question, well, first I'd have to answer how I'm still alive, but two, I'd have to answer why it was me and not her mom. For him, it's like, I'm a terrible person, because we learned in his childhood his dad seems like very abusive, and it's like for him it's a cycle in itself. It's like his dad did some terrible stuff, didn't apologize, and it kept going, and he feels like it's repeating itself with him and his own child, and you know, he just feels tortured by it. It is a sad situation, because now that kind of puts a lot more perspective, because even Cliff kind of says like, you know, why our parents all kind of mess us up, which I guess in a sense, when you break everything down, everyone's parents were responsible for messing them up, because obviously like this ties into Jane's situation, because for Jane it's a situation of like, we see her dad, like she's screaming as a baby, crying, and then like her dad just comes in and just walks away after looking at her. And so then like she's smashing all the tapes connected to Niles, because Niles talks about the fact that she disconnects herself from a lot of people. It's like, look at you, Jane, you literally have 63 other roommates who you don't even know half their other names. But he's like, I think that you could bring those connections together, and the fact is that it would basically essentially make her happy and stuff. And he's like, even if things don't work out, and if you know you don't end up doing that, I'll still be that father figure for her. And obviously Hammerhead ends up smashing all the tapes, because it's like he was going to put us in a fucking home. So obviously that new revelation is obviously pissing off a lot of people, in particular Hammerhead, because that's, I guess, what's Hammerhead kind of represents the most, like when those feelings inside of Jane kind of muster up, that side of her ends up coming out. But obviously Jane, like, she wants to justify it by being like, no, we just have to find Niles and he can explain like everything. And so it turns into this situation of, now you kind of understand why she lashes out like she does. Like, the fact is, she, like, obviously we can see like a lot of her issue stems from her dad and like all these different father figures that could have been in her life. Of course she's pissed at Niles because she feels like Niles was abandoning her, because he was going to put her in the same home that the original Doom Patrol was put in. And it's like, he was going to do that to me. He was talking about he's going to be a father to me, but he abandoned me. Then she got kind of similar vibes from Cliff, but then she kind of saw that side of Cliff, and it's like, oh, he's a monster too. Like, that's like every father figure in her life seems like they abandon her, or they end up being some kind of monster. And I think, you know, like, Cliff was like the last person she could hold on to. I mean, not Cliff, but Niles was the last person she could hold on to with that situation, and his betrayal just made her snap. So that's why I think she said what she said too, that like, how can you be a father when you're not even a man? I think that was her kind of dealing with her own issues and kind of putting them on Cliff. You know, that's why she looks so harshly upon him in that regard and stuff like that. And I think that's why Hammerhead snaps at him so much in that regard. Just because it's kind of the defense mechanism of like, oh, this is how Jane's feeling because of her own personal situation. So Hammerhead's kind of reflecting that, you know? like I said, all on its own, I was like, oh man, this is a powerful and great therapy session, especially because it caught me off guard because it was Cliff leading the therapy session, him clapping and being like, oh, everyone's getting all this stuff off their chest. It's like, yeah, yeah, yay. And then the piece de la resistance is the fact is it wasn't all Cliff, because I was like, the moment like he started really getting into it, I was like, this is obviously Mr. Nobody. No one else is real life. Like the way he was kind of getting all jittery and stuff like that, he was kind of like getting like restless leg syndrome. I was like, oh man, Mr. Nobody is there. He's getting all excited and angsty because he's getting inside of people's head. But then I was like, maybe that's not what the case is. Turns out I was somewhat right, because it turns out it was Admiral, what was his name again? Admiral Whiskers. Yes, it's like, oh, 6 days earlier, basically his mom got ran over. Mr. Nobody started talking to him, and it's like look up, I'm the narrator. It's like, what's a narrator? Okay, I'm not about to go in explaining that, but the fact is, it's like, oh, I don't want revenge, and he's like, oh, who told you some BS like that? And so Mr. Nobody set this in motion because it was Cliff that was driving the bus at the time that it ran over his mom, and that's what this has all been. It like basically that rat got inside of his head. It's like, fuck his brain, fuck his heart, fuck his soul. And it's just kind of what Cliff had said early in the episode that Mr. Nobody was going to do to them if they didn't kind of get their shit out there. So it ends up making the team implode even more, because now, because of what Cliff says, Jane's walking away. Maybe that's all the point. Maybe because Jane could potentially be a nuisance. Maybe that's why he wanted Jane to know about the original Doom Patrol and what Niles might have had planned for her. We don't know. Maybe Niles did originally have that plan, but then as time went on, he recognized what was inside of Jane. He was like, no, she's going to be here because I'm going to be the one to look after her. It's like, who's to say he didn't have a change of heart or something like that? We won't know until Niles finally explains himself. But I think maybe the whole point was to push Jane out of anyone away just because of her powers and stuff like that. She could be a threat to Mr. Nobody, but we don't know that. I mean, because the fact is, I'm like, how do you fight a being like him who can literally warp reality the way he does and has literal fourth wall breaking abilities, which just end up being a thing of like, oh yeah, that's connected to his reality bending abilities. But still, once again, you just have to expressly put that in as its own thing of like, it's a fourth wall of breaking ability. Not just reality, fourth wall breaking. And that's pretty damn tough to beat. But I'm curious to see, like, obviously, is everyone to put it together being like, oh, that was a Mr. Nobody rat situation, the whole Admiral Whiskers things, or is it just kind of like, oh, a rat crawled in? Interestingly enough, it crawled into the hole that was from Vic's cannon exploding, and it's just kind of like, there's not serendipity, but it's just kind of interesting how everything ended up flowing together like that, because the whole cannon exploding thing was because of Mr. Nobody, and the rat finding a spot to kind of slide in like that was from Mr. Nobody. It's a whole thing, so it's going to be interesting to see if the Doom Patrol is going to be able to pull themselves together, because that was the whole point, is to break them into the point that they can't or don't want to fight back anymore. Like, obviously, like, a lot of the therapy session kind of worked, I think, but I think it also just probably gave, Mr. Nobody kind of more chuckles, more ammunition to potentially use against them. But to be fair, like, I'm sure everything that they said this episode was stuff he already knew anyway, because it got inside their heads, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see what the next episode has in store for us. I mean, especially because Jane finally showed them the painting she drew back in episode 2 of them all dying and everything. So that's sucky. I mean, obviously they're thinking like, oh, it's just a painting and stuff like that. But it's like Hangman kind of doesn't paint the, wrong thing. It's like she saw that when Hangman saw, was inside of the donkey and everything. So, but it could just be further like Mr. Nobody messing with them, showing them like, hey, when this is all said and done, this is what their future holds for them. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. Like I said, I'm excited to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I want to talk about today. Next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.